Smashing Pumpkins from the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness album. The track you just heard, 33. That album released one day after my birthday on October 24th, 1995. Good stuff there from Billy Corgan and Smashing Pumpkins. Billy Corgan performed 9 tracks from the Melancholy and the Infinite Sadness album last night in a very stripped-down environment at Ravinia. Some excellent stuff there. Well, had the chance to chat 2 weeks ago with Billy Corgan. Listeners of this show heard part 1 last week. We talked a lot about the Ravinia show at that point. This week, we get into the series of album reissues, and it's a pretty extensive set of reissues that he's putting together for Smashing Pumpkins. Next up in that series is 1998's Adore album, getting the reissue treatment to the tune of 107 tracks. So Smashing Pumpkins purists, this is definitely the type of project that you'll want details on. You can get all of that at smashingpumpkinsnexus.com, the official Smashing Pumpkins website. But yeah, talked with Billy Corgan, and we also got into a little bit about the future of rock and roll in America, as well as, the value of an artist in the internet era. Talking about the reissues, and Adore is next in that reissue campaign, and I'm pretty intrigued by Adore in particular, and it's pretty well documented what a personal album that was for you at the time when it was released in 1998. I would think diving back into that to the tune of 107 tracks, which is what makes up the Adore reissue, I would think that has to be a pretty all-encompassing process. What's it like for you now to go back to that particular point in your life?
Somebody asked me a similar question the other day, and I was surprised by my answer because, it's like sometimes I don't think about these things until I'm asked. For me, it's more like almost clinical. I don't have as much emotional connection to the tracks in that mindset, meaning my number one goal is, can I put together something that's really quality so that if somebody puts their hard-earned money down, they feel good about it, Because I'm a big, I buy all the box sets from people I love, I'll buy, like, people's box sets you can't believe I buy. And I know what it's like to feel burned by that. You know what I mean? You look and you go, oh, it's got 20 extra tracks, and you listen, it's just total dreck.
Like they're just putting something out to justify a box set.
Well, and you also don't, oftentimes, and I don't know anything particularly, but you oftentimes don't feel the artist's hand in it. You don't feel like they're guiding the process, like somebody was given a job, like, hey, Joe, go figure that out.
Put this together so we can charge $100 for it.
Yeah, and there's a coldness to it. And I kind of approach it like, because when I was a kid, I used to make mixtapes, So I take like a mixtape approach, which is, like, if I gave this to a friend, would they be like, oh, that was cool, and when'd you do that demo, or that's weird, like, what were you thinking when you did that? Like, I want that conversation, which is why I leave off stuff that's like no-brainer, Some fans will complain, like, I can't believe you didn't put on, and I'm like, yeah, it's not that good,
Right, go find it on YouTube.
Yeah, it's not meant to be, I guess, I know it sounds funny, but it's not meant to be a completist thing. Because there's probably another 30-ish Adore tracks, remixes, and, by, big DJs, and I didn't put any of that stuff on. I just didn't feel it was relevant to what I was trying to say with this. So for me, it's very personal in the sense, but I have to be clinical from the standpoint of, does this belong on here? Because obviously I generate a lot of work product, and there's all sorts of rough mixes and alternate vocals, but a lot of it's just not very good, I could put it out and call it unreleased, but it doesn't really mean anything. So, yeah, but I have to be really kind of detached, and there's a lot of detective work. Missing tapes and bad memories and mislabeled boxes. We get that sometimes.
When it comes to the reissue campaign, and regardless of which of the albums, when you were putting these together, was there anything that, when you were going back and digging through the archives, that you found that you just completely forgot about or that you were completely blown away by?
Not in terms of tracks, because I'm pretty familiar with the material. I think if I could give you something different, then
sure.
It amazes me how fast we worked. The original 4 of us, we were a band for about 2.5 years, I think, before we did Gish. And once that process kicked in, around 90, when we started touring like Sub Pop Single and all that stuff, we were together, almost nonstop for 10 years or 11 or whatever. And for whatever reason, the way we communicated, the way we worked together, we worked really fast. Jimmy Chamberlain in particular has, if he doesn't have a photographic memory, he's got a near photographic memory. And we had really high expectations, which was like if we worked on a song and we changed a bunch of stuff, you were expected to come in the next day and kind of pick up where you left off. And we were able to do that. I don't know how, because sometimes I'm like, wow, it's so crazy, because I'll even like, here's a really good example. When we got towards the end of making Melancholy, we had this board. I have a picture of it somewhere. It's kind of funny. We had this board with like little check marks, like what we needed to finish. And the song XYU, which was basically rehearsed and basically ready to be recorded, when we got around to recording it, Flood was like, "Oh man, this is going to be a hassle."
And why would that be?
Because it was always stops and starts and tempo changes, and to try to make it like tight, in the old way, not the Pro Tool way, it's take time. So he goes, "What about recording it live in the studio?" I'm like, "You do that?" And he's like, "Of course." So him and Alan, we were at CRC downtown. Him and Alan set us up in this little room, and we brought in a PA, and we played it full volume.
Jesus.
It was deafening. Okay, so I knew in the back of my mind, like, oh, okay, we're going to do this reissue. I know there were other full takes because they were, I was singing live too. So I thought, there's, you look at this sheet and there's like 9 or 10 other takes, or 13, I don't even remember. And you go, one of these has got to be good enough to release. So put on take 1. It's 30 BPM slower. The arrangement is different. And you listen every take. And of course, this all happened in like less than 3 hours.
Okay.
So in less than 3 hours, the song completely evolved to what is the released version.
Wow.
And it's like, being in the moment, I didn't even think of it. You know what I mean? It was like, that's just what we did. But standing back, 20 years later, and listening, I was like, wow, this is crazy. We would literally do a take, and I go, change this, and we do another take. And that was very common. We would even do stuff like, we'd be walking on stage, and I go, hey, in the second chorus on this song, can you hold that one part a little longer so that I can do this and you'll do that? And everyone would go, okay, and we'd go out and do it. No rehearsal. So whatever reason, that kind of shocked me coming back is just how fast that band worked.
That's crazy. Though you guys did rehearse, almost legendarily so.
Yeah. No one believes me, of course, but we never argued about music. And I think that shows, in the output. We kind of agreed in the idea of being restless in the exploration, and they were cool to follow me on this mad journey that I set up. All the other stuff was all the other stuff. But when it came to music, we were all business.
AM 1420 WIMS, you've got the Rock and Roll Radio program. My name is Jim Ryan, on the air tonight until 7 o'clock with my guest, Mr. Billy Corgan of Smashing Pumpkins. He performed last night in Highland Park at Ravinia alongside Smashing Pumpkins guitarist Jeff Schroeder, and is in the midst of putting together an entire series of Smashing Pumpkins album reissues. The next one in that series, of course, the Adore album. We talked about that, locking in at 107 tracks. If you're a fan, this is a great time to be a fan of the Smashing Pumpkins because so much of this material is seeing the light of day. But as we continue our conversation here, we kind of started to get into, a little bit more in terms of the role of an artist in a continually changing music landscape, and even more interestingly, the future of rock and roll in America in the social media era. Some people like to use the phrase rock is dead. That seems to be a very popular one these last few years.
I said it. I was ahead of my time. I said it in 98.
See, I don't think it's dead. I just think it's very boring and predictable, but also cyclical, which means it could be good again someday, I hope. But in your opinion, is that insertion of kind of rebelliousness and unpredictability, which to me is kind of what rock and roll was born out of in the first place, are those going to be key elements in bringing rock back?
I have a hard time believing that in America we can have a genuine moment.
All right.
Because of the way we communicate through social media and interpersonally. Part of the shock and awe of Elvis or Nirvana was, where the did this come from?
Sure.
And let's not forget, those things took time to develop. They didn't have a microscope on them. The first time Elvis went into Sun Records, there wasn't an Instagram of him, on the microphone. So when America heard him on, Jailhouse Rock or whatever, they were like, who the is this guy?
Fair enough.
Of course, people, the hipsters of the time were like, oh yeah, I've been listening for years. You know what I mean?
Hipsters, sure.
Right. Same thing with Nirvana. I mean, I saw Nirvana, on the first couple Bleach and all that. So when I was talking to the guy I went to high school with, and he's like, so what's with this Nirvana? You know what I mean? I couldn't tell him about how I'd seen him at the Metro with the other drummer, and they didn't care. For all they knew, the band had dropped out of the sky. I don't think in America you're going to have the drop out of the sky moment. I have a really hard time believing that. Or if you're that artist, let's pretend the next rock sensation's a girl.
Okay.
Or a woman. Okay. The minute that white light hits them,
yeah,
how do they not become calculating?
I don't know.
Or how does somebody not show up on their side and start telling them how to be calculating?
When you said you don't think we're capable of having that moment anymore, I'm not sure if I agree or disagree, but the closest I've gotten to it in a long time at a concert was, at of all places, Lollapalooza. Lorde said a couple of weeks ago there. I was really swept up in it. And I was kind of neither here nor there on her stuff going into it, but nobody was standing there during that set looking at an iPad or, fleeing to go watch somebody else or to go get another beer. It was a really collective experience, and that kind of shocked me. But getting to what you were just saying in terms of her being a female, that performance felt really authentic. I mean, it didn't feel forced or guided or...
Well, maybe she's talented enough to where she can turn that corner and shirk off the expectation.
I hope so. I guess we'll see.
If I was a guessing person, and nothing against her or any other artist, it's going to come from a place that's never had that moment.
Okay.
A la, the next Elvis will come from India. The next Lorde, from an indie perspective, would come from China.
Interesting.
Because it'll be that innocence and enthusiasm of a culture that's never been through it. Because at the end of the day, if you're not really shocking the culture, right? And I'm saying, again, nothing against anybody, but tell me what internationally known artist right now is shocking the culture, truly.
Off the top of my head, I would be hard pressed to come up with one, and that probably says a lot.
That's what I'm saying. They have to send literally a lightning bolt through the culture, because it has to make people second guess not just music, their clothes, their thinking, and the great stars of our lifetime, do that. And I just don't see where the media systems of this country in particular are able to be supple enough to deal with that innocently. Where if you had Elvis in India, they would be like, what the
all right, I see what you're getting at.
Right? Because they never had that. Imagine if you had the next Beatles came from India, 1.3 billion people, and half the country's under 30. Imagine that energy.
I'll give you that.
As opposed to 60,000 people standing in the field with an artist that's loved by pop world, loved by media world, considered good looking, or attractive. And you could say that about 50 artists. I'm saying, I'm not pointing at anybody particular. It has to have a sense of danger to it, of real rebellion. And that's not to say anything about these artists. That's why I'm trying to be so careful of what I mean.
Understood.
It's not their fault that they're coming on the tail end of something that's sort of really been explored. And it really starts with, in terms of general rock and roll culture, it really starts with Elvis, although there were other people before that. Whether Louis Armstrong, you can argue, was the first true rock star.
That's interesting, because I never really considered him in that particular way.
Right, but he was the first true avant-garde, groundbreaking artist that destroyed everything in his path, because he was that good and he was that groundbreaking. He was that much of a person unto himself. I just don't see where we're. So if let's say you take my way of putting it, if it starts with Louis Armstrong, so that's 1928 or whatever, and let's say it kind of ended, in 2000. The death of whatever that era was. Okay, that's a lot of time to reflect, dissect, put him in the movies, make fun of him. Oh, now he's fat. to be dismissive of the person and then find that the public won't let them go because they're so beloved. All these things that we've been through as a nation with our rock stars.
Mm-hmm.
Now take it into a country, Nigeria maybe had Fela, but they haven't had the Beatles. India maybe had Ravi Shankar, but they haven't had, Nirvana. I'd like to see that. That to me would be mind blowing. So
it'd certainly be different.
That's what I'm saying. I think if I'm being really trying to dig down to your question, that's to me where I go. You got to go somewhere where they haven't had that experience collectively.
6:31 p.m. here on AM 1420 WIMS. Just about halfway home this evening on the Rock and Roll Radio program. Happy Labor Day. Hope you're having a great extended holiday weekend. My name is Jim Ryan. Thank you to my guest, Billy Corgan, for joining me here the past 2 weeks. Very candid, very insightful, and answered everything very directly. You don't get that a lot in these interviews. Certainly no talking points from Billy Corgan, so much appreciated. If you want to catch up on all things Smashing Pumpkins related, Billy Corgan has a lot of projects in the work, including the series of reissues we just talked about, plus 2 new Smashing Pumpkins albums forthcoming, 1 new solo album from Billy Corgan forthcoming, plus an autobiography, also a reality show following Resistance Pro Wrestling. A lot of these projects in the works. You can get the details at the official Smashing Pumpkins website, smashingpumpkinsnexus.com. So again, thanks to Billy Corgan for joining me here on the Rock and Roll Radio program the last 2 weeks. Posting this audio as well on our Facebook page, so go like us there, the Rock and Roll Radio program. Also, Twitter. I'm Jim Ryan at Radio Jim Ryan. You can also follow the show at Rock Radio WIMS, and we'll be posting the audio from this interview on the web. Week 1 is already up. Later this week, hopefully Monday or Tuesday, we'll get to part 2 as well. But we continue this evening with the music of X. X returns to town for 4 shows this coming week, Tuesday through Friday at City Winery, and they get things started Tuesday night with a full performance of the Los Angeles album. In fact, performing each of their first 4 albums, 1 per night, in its entirety. Again, that's Tuesday through Friday at City Winery. Spoke with ex-frontman John Doe. That interview before 7 o'clock, so stick around here on the Rock and Roll Radio program as we continue now with X.